The eighth-floor conference room looked more like a showcase of power than a workspace. Spotless glass walls, a dark wooden table shining under the white lights, leather chairs that practically screamed how expensive they were. On the walls, framed company awards reflected the vanity of whoever was in charge. It was the kind of environment where only strong names, high numbers, and firm voices seemed to belong. And it was exactly into this scene that Livia, the new administration intern, walked for the first time. Simple appearance, cheap business clothes, hair tied back in a rush. The contrast was almost jarring. While the executives flaunted expensive watches and smug smiles, she held a worn-out notebook she'd been using since technical school. She walked slowly, trying not to draw attention. But in that room, just being different was already an invitation to judgment. At the center sat Dr. Mauro, the director, perfect grey suit, rigid posture, cold eyes. Everyone feared him. And that day he looked especially irritated. "As late as the intern, are we?" He fired the moment he saw her walk in. The sentence sliced through the air like a blade. Livia froze. "Sorry, sir. The elevator. I didn't ask for excuses." He raised his eyebrows with disdain. "If you want to work here, you need to learn to respect the time of people who matter." The other employees laughed quietly, some out of malice, others out of fear of contradicting the boss. Either way, it only made Livia's face burn even hotter. "Sit over there in the corner and stay quiet. I don't want distractions," Mauro finished, pointing to a chair pushed away from the table, practically a time-out spot. She obeyed in silence, but inside, a mix of shame and indignation twisted her stomach, and the worst was still to come. A few minutes later, Mauro asked for something unexpected. "Someone needs to review the financial report before we send it to the board, but I imagine that's a bit too complicated for an intern." He stared at her with a crooked smile. "Or is it not, Livia? Want to give it a try so we can have a little fun?" She felt the hit. It was obvious he didn't want help. He wanted a show. Livia took a deep breath, trying to keep her posture. "If you'd like, sir, I can try." The laughter got louder. "Of course you can. It'll be fun to see what an inexperienced girl can do with something this complex," Mauro poked. But no one in that room had any idea that that report, and everything that would come from it, was about to turn everyone's fate upside down. Because while Mauro mocked her, something subtle caught Livia's attention. A wrong number. A projection that made no sense. She frowned, but stayed silent. It wasn't the moment yet. For now, the humiliation continued. "By the way," the director said, crossing his arms, "tomorrow we'll have a meeting with the board. I don't want mistakes, I don't want surprises, and I definitely don't want incompetent interns getting in the way." The word incompetent echoed in her mind, hurting more than it should, but what would happen the next day would change everything. Absolutely everything. And what no one in that room could imagine was that the person who would show up at that meeting, someone completely off Mauro's radar, had the power to flip that company on its head. Someone far more influential than anyone there suspected. Someone directly connected to Livia. But to understand who Livia really was and why that meeting would become historic, we need to go back a few years. Before she was the intern humiliated in the meeting, Livia was just a girl from a poor neighborhood who grew up hearing that people like her had to settle for less. Her house was simple, on the outskirts of the city, peeling walls, a rusty gate that squeaked every time someone opened it. But inside, there was something missing in many luxury buildings: respect. The central figure in that home was Ms. Helena, Livia's mother. Calloused hands, steady. Gaze, tired but genuine smile. For many years, she worked as a receptionist and assistant in a small accounting office, doing everything: answering phones, serving coffee, organizing documents, helping with spreadsheets. She had no degree, but her sense of responsibility would put a lot of suit-wearing executives to shame. Since she was little, Livia spent her afternoons in a corner of that office, coloring on the back of scrap paper. While she doodled, she overheard conversations about bills, taxes, deadlines, contracts. Without realizing it, she started getting familiar with that universe of numbers, reports, and decisions that changed people's lives. Now I'm going to show you an important detail. It was there that her connection with the corporate world was born. One day, when she was only 9, Livia saw something she never forgot. A client burst in, shouting, treating Helena badly because a document had been delayed, even though it wasn't her fault. "You're just the girl at the front desk. You're not paid to think," he snapped, throwing a folder onto the counter. That word just got stuck in Livia's throat. She saw her mother take a deep breath, swallow her pride, and answer calmly, "Sir, I understand your concern. I'll do everything I can to solve this today. Inside, though, Helena was burning, and her daughter felt it. The narrator knew. In that moment, something lit up inside that little girl. At home later, while they washed the dishes, Livia broke the silence. "Mom, why did you let him talk to you like that?" Helena sighed. "Because sometimes, honey, we have to choose between being right and keeping the job. But," she looked her daughter straight in the eye, "that doesn't mean what he did was right. I don't want anyone talking to you like that, or to me." Helena gave a little sideways smile. "Then study, Livia. Learn. One day you're going to sit at the table where decisions are made. At school, things weren't that different." Livia always stood out in math, but she was underestimated because of her simple clothes, her old backpack, her reused notebooks. One teacher even said out loud, "You're very smart, but you know it's hard for someone from your neighborhood to get a big position in a company, right?" It sounded almost like a sentence. Right there, hearing that, Livia made her first promise to herself. As she stared at the board full of equations, she thought, in silence, almost like a vow, "One day, I'm going to change this. I'm going to prove that people from humble backgrounds belong at the top too, and no one is ever going to talk to my mother like she's less than she is." That sentence became the invisible fuel behind every choice she made. Every time someone laughed at her ambition, every time they said, "An internship at a big company isn't for you," that promise came back stronger. But her challenges were only beginning, and no one around her imagined that in her teenage years, Livia would discover that the world out there could be even more cruel, and that it would be exactly that cruelty that would shape the woman who, years later, would leave an entire room of executives in total silence. Livia's teenage years didn't leave room for a rebellious phase. While many people her age complained about getting up early for school, she was juggling a 5 a.m. alarm, packed buses, and constant exhaustion. The narrator could see clearly. This wasn't just a heavy routine. It was the silent construction of someone who refused to accept a pre-written fate. In high school, Livia enrolled in a technical program in business administration. After competing for a spot against hundreds of other candidates, the list of accepted students went up on a simple bulletin board, and her name was there, among so many last names she'd never even heard before. "You made it, honey!" Helena practically shouted in the hallway, hugging her daughter tightly. The joy didn't last long. Along with that spot came the cost of transportation, materials, meals away from home. There was no miracle. There was choice. So Livia started balancing school and work. In the mornings, classes. In the afternoons, she helped her mother at the accounting office, organizing receipts, filing documents, gradually understanding how companies, contracts, and deadlines worked. At night, she picked up side gigs typing spreadsheets for small local shop owners on an old computer that froze every 10 minutes. Now I'm going to show you a detail almost no one knew. Many of those spreadsheets she made at night were free. "Why don't you charge them, honey?" Helena would ask. "Because they don't even know what a spreadsheet is, Mom. If I help them now, one day they'll trust me when I need them." As her sense of responsibility grew, so did the prejudice around her. At the technical school, some classmates looked at her sideways whenever she said where she lived. "You live up in that hill?" a girl asked, barely masking the disgust. "Wow, aren't you afraid to come down here every day?" Livia swallowed the angry answer. She had already learned that sometimes silence is more elegant than any argument. During her mandatory internship for the course, the difference became even more obvious. She got a position as a youth apprentice in a small logistics company. It wasn't the big dream corporation, but it was the first real door into the world she'd always observed from outside. There, she got to know hierarchy up close, formal emails, meetings where nobody looked at the intern, and a different kind of humiliation. The subtle kind, disguised as a joke. "Hey, intern, bring me a coffee. That's what you're here for anyway," an older employee would say, laughing while others nodded along. On the outside, she forced a smile. On the inside, the narrator saw a mix of anger and focus growing. But it wasn't all contempt. There were also people who saw beyond her appearance. Livia's direct supervisor, Mr. Alberto, a simple middle-aged man, started noticing something different about her. "You build these control spreadsheets better than a lot of analysts around here," he commented one day, staring at the screen. "I just like organizing things," she answered, shy. "No, you don't just like it. You have talent, and talent is not something we waste." He was the one who brought a crumpled flyer to Livia's desk. A selection process for an internship at a big company downtown, the same company where, years later, that arrogant director would humiliate her in a meeting. "Try this. It's hard, but I've seen you do things way harder than a test, he said, leaving the paper there. That night, holding the flyer, Livia looked out the small bedroom window. Outside, the noise of the neighborhood. Inside, the weight of a decision. If she tried, she could fail. She could hear yet again that people like her don't get that far. If she didn't try, she'd already lost. So she made a second promise to herself, more mature than the first. I won't let fear decide for me. If I have to lose, I'll lose trying. And if I get in there, I'll never forget where I came from. She studied for that selection process, as if that internship were her only possible way forward, because in many ways it was. She practiced interviews alone in front of the mirror, rehearsed answers, memorized technical terms. The narrator knew this wasn't just an application on a job website. It was Livia's first conscious step toward the world that would one day publicly underestimate her. The result didn't come easily or quickly. There were multiple stages, group dynamics, cuts. At each phase, she scanned the list of approved candidates with her heart in her throat, hoping her simple last name had survived a little longer. Until one ordinary afternoon, while she was helping her mother check documents, her phone buzzed. An email. Congratulations, you have been accepted into the internship program. In that moment, something clicked into place inside her. It wasn't just joy. It was confirmation that the path, however hard, was worth it. And without realizing it, Livia sealed the commitment that would guide her entire adult life. Work twice as hard, study 3 times as much, keep her character intact, even when the world tried to crush her. Years later, that commitment would come at a high price, but also bring unimaginable rewards. No one, not even her, was prepared for what would come next. When Livia walked into that big downtown company as an intern for the first time, everything about her screamed beginner. ID badge with a crooked photo, simple clothes, eyes paying attention to every detail. No one there had any idea what the narrator already knew. That girl carried a backstory most directors wouldn't have the courage to live through. The routine got demanding fast. In the morning, the company. In the afternoon, tasks that went far beyond making copies and serving coffee. She organized spreadsheets, cross-checked data, reviewed reports. At night, she went to her business administration classes at a public university, a spot she'd earned after months of studying for the entrance exam. Deep into the night, she worked on papers, projects, case studies. Meanwhile, Helena kept working and, encouraged by her daughter, went back to studying too. She started with a refresher course in accounting, then enrolled in an online college program. Mother and daughter, each in their own rhythm, diving into the same universe. Companies, numbers, responsibility. Now I'm going to show you something nobody at that multinational had a clue about. Little by little, the two of them started offering more professional consulting services to small businesses in their neighborhood. Bakeries, corner markets, beauty salons, auto shops. They organized cash flow, renegotiated debts, taught owners how to separate business money from personal money. One of those small clients almost went bankrupt. Thanks to Helena's guidance and Livia's own projections, the business turned around. Months later, the owner brought a fellow business person to meet the two women who saved companies with a pencil, a notebook, and a spreadsheet. That's how, without glamour, their reputation was born. Inside the company, some people still called her the Excel girl, as if that were a joke. Outside, business owners were starting to see something rare in Livia and Helena. Solid, technical knowledge combined with an unshakable ethical backbone. Their first big wins were discreet but unforgettable. With the money from their consulting services, they renovated their simple home. They fixed the leaky roof, bought a new computer, and finally paid cash for Helena's long-dreamed-of washing machine. Look at this, honey. We used to wash clothes by hand. Now the machine does it for us. It's not the machine, Mom, it's you. You're the one who always held everything together. This is just the beginning, Livia answered, eyes full of tears. Even with a bit more money coming in, Livia still took the bus to work, brought the same simple lunch from home, and used the same beat-up notebook. She could have upgraded her phone, her clothes, her attitude. Instead, she upgraded her books, her courses, her responsibilities. She invested in certifications, corporate finance workshops, governance and compliance programs. While many interns spent their small salaries on parties, she spent her free time watching online classes about financial markets, mergers and acquisitions. It was in one of those courses that she first came across the name of an experienced investor, Riccardo Moretti, a man who would later become a key piece in this story. He was impressed with the questions that this Livia girl kept sending in the class chat. Who is this Livia, who only asks the hard questions, he wondered, laughing to himself. Sometime later, based on the recommendation of one of the small business owners Helena had helped, Ricardo scheduled a meeting with the two of them. In that simple office in their neighborhood, a man used to glass tables and climate-controlled boardrooms listened in silence to Livia's analysis of a company in trouble. No slides, no suit, no fancy English, just data, logic, and a frightening level of clarity. You know you think like someone who sits on a board of directors, right? He said at the end. I just try to be fair with the numbers and with the people, she answered. That's exactly what the market is missing. Over time, Ricardo invited mother and daughter to work as consultants for a small group of investors focused on distressed companies. They stayed the same, simple, away from magazine covers. But they now had access to reports few people saw, to negotiations that changed the fate of hundreds of employees. From the outside, it looked like nothing had changed. To the bus driver, she was still just a young woman with a basic backpack. To her college classmates, just a dedicated student. To many at the company, just another intern. But inside, the narrator could see Livia was already huge. She was already participating, even if behind the scenes, in decisions that affected entire chains of workers. People who signed checks with lots of zeros were already listening to her voice. And that's when the name of the company where Dr. Mauro reigned came up. The investor group, the same one Ricardo was part of, began studying a possible stake in that company, and a very specific request came up. Before any decision, we need to understand the heart of this company, its culture, the way they treat ordinary people, Ricardo said. Helena didn't think twice before suggesting something that would change everything. Let my daughter go in as an intern. She knows how to see what doesn't show up in the reports. And that's what they did. Livia applied for that company's internship program like any other young person looking for a chance. She went through every stage, tests, group dynamics, interviews. No one there had the slightest idea who she already was outside those halls. And that's how, years later, Livia walked into that 8th-floor conference room as just another intern, sitting in the corner with her simple notebook in hand, while secretly carrying a power no one there could even imagine. The next morning, the 8th floor was silent and tense. The meeting with the board was all anyone could talk about. For Livia, it was the direct continuation of the humiliation from the day before. She stepped off the elevator with the same simple badge, hair up, cheap blazer. She still looked like just an intern. But after staying up the entire night reviewing the financial report, she carried something no one else could see, a clear suspicion that there was something very serious hidden in those numbers. When she walked into the room, the scene was familiar. Long table, leather chairs, freezing air conditioning. In the center, Dr. Mauro was reviewing his slide deck. The moment he saw her, he made a loud comment. Ah, the intern. He gave a half smile. Today she's on time. Around here, punctuality is protocol, not a favor. She should be grateful just to be in this room, an analyst muttered. Livia simply replied, Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone, and walked to the chair against the wall, far from the main table. Mauro tapped his pen against the table. Ladies and gentlemen, today we'll have members of the board and representatives of the investors. I want everything done by the book. No one speaks unless spoken to. No one questions decisions made by the directors. Is that clear? He looked at her again. And you, intern. Today you're just observing. Yesterday's show was more than enough. The lights dimmed and the slides started. When the financial report came up on the screen, Livia's heart tightened. They were the same numbers she'd torn apart the night before, finding unrealistic projections and risks being swept under the rug as if they didn't exist. Mauro spoke with total confidence. These are the results of our work. Solid growth, healthy margins, a promising future. Everything reviewed by the directors, the technical teams, and even used as an exercise for our intern. Imagine if we had to rely on her, someone murmured. Interns aren't here to correct directors, another added. Livia felt her face heat up again, but held herself together. It still wasn't the right moment. Then Mauro crossed his arms. Let's use this in a more educational way. Intern, pay attention. The room went quiet. You have until the end of the day to, following company protocol, hand me a written report, signed, pointing out any inconsistencies you believe exist in these numbers. A formal, fileable document. He paused. If you prove you're right, I'll register a formal compliment in your file and admit in front of the entire team that I underestimated you. If you're wrong, I'll recommend your immediate dismissal from the internship program for questioning the work of the board without grounds, all within company policy. The murmuring started. She won't accept. She'd be asking to get fired. Mauro pressed on. So, Livia, going to take it on? Or would you rather stay quiet in the corner and let the people who know what they're doing decide? In that instant, the narrator saw her entire life flash before her. Her mother being humiliated. At that old front desk, her childhood promises, the night studying, the reason she had chosen that company in the first place. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and looked him right in the eye. I accept, sir. If there's an inconsistency, it's my responsibility to point it out. If I'm wrong, I'll accept the consequences. Mauro smiled, satisfied. Excellent. Let it be recorded in front of everyone. A formal commitment between management and the intern. This will be a very educational experience. Livia simply nodded. Her heart raced, her palms were sweaty, but her gaze was steady. Back down now and she'd be betraying everything she'd been through to get to that 8th floor. What no one knew was that the game was about to turn, and the first move of that turning point was already walking down the hallway toward that door, along with someone very special, someone connected to the intern everyone thought was insignificant. The meeting wasn't even over yet when the door opened quietly. No one noticed, except Livia, whose heart skipped for a second, but the person who came in didn't say anything. They simply waited at the back of the room, observing in silence. The narrator knew that would matter very soon. Meanwhile, at the main table, Dr. Mauro went on talking as if he had total control of the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, our report shows stability, growth, and full strategic alignment, he declared, with the kind of self-confidence you only see in people who've never been challenged. But then, something different happened. As soon as the slides disappeared from the screen, a representative from the Finance Committee asked, "Before we finish, does anyone want to make any comment?" The question lingered in the air. Silence. Glances exchanged. Then, unexpectedly, someone whispered, "What about the intern? Didn't she want to comment on something?" Mauro's face darkened. "The intern has already been instructed. She will only present something in writing. There will be no interruptions." That's when the mood in the room started to shift. Livia took a deep breath. Her voice trembled slightly, but it was firm when she spoke. "Excuse me, may I present a preview? It's not the final report, but I believe it's important to show part of what I found." Mauro's eyes widened. "I made it clear that you were not—" "Let her speak," a board member cut in, curious. "If she's going to be held accountable later, it's only fair we hear her now." The director swallowed hard. He couldn't afford to disrespect a board member. 2 minutes, intern, and watch what you say." Livia stood up. She looked small in front of that massive table, but the courage inside her was growing. She opened her battered notebook full of scribbles from the previous night. "I reviewed the projections of revenue for the next semester and they don't match the numbers from the last internal audit," she said. "There are 3 main discrepancies." She flipped quickly through the pages, pointing with her finger. "First, the growth projection is based on contracts that have not been renewed. Second, there are expenses recorded as recurring that should be under extraordinary costs. Third, there's a transfer labeled as an operational adjustment that in reality artificially inflates our margins." Some employees frowned, others started whispering. There was disbelief, but also doubt. A manager murmured, surprised, "I honestly never noticed that transfer." Another analyst said under his breath, "That completely changes the margin projection." The wall of absolute confidence in Mauro began to crack. The director tried to regain control. "This is absurd. She's interpreting it wrong. These are complex numbers for someone at her level. It's all coincidence, luck, a misunderstanding." But the narrator could see it. Mauro wasn't just irritated. He was scared. "Her notes seem coherent," one of the board members said, leaning forward. "I'd like to review these calculations more closely." Another added, "The margin cannot be inflated without formal justification." Mauro lost some color. "This proves nothing," he snapped, raising his voice. "Reports are complex. She has no authority to—" "No one is talking about authority," the board member interrupted again. "We're talking about facts, and what she just showed is, at the very least, relevant." Some employees now looked at Mauro with confusion, as if things were finally starting to make sense. Others still defended him with hard glares toward the intern, as if she were insolent. But no one was indifferent anymore. Livia drew another breath, gripping her notebook tightly. "I can present more details in the formal report you requested," she said, looking at Mauro, respectful, not afraid. He clenched his jaw and forced a smile. Of course, we'll see if these findings hold up. But inside, the narrator knew. Mauro was barely holding back his panic. Right at that moment, the person standing in the back of the room, the one who had come, in quietly took a step forward, drawing everyone's attention. Heads turned, the air tightened. But that was just the beginning. The next pieces of evidence would be impossible to ignore. The door clicked shut behind the figure walking across the room, and silence spread like an invisible crack. Everyone turned to look, including Dr. Mauro, whose expression melted into something between surprise and pure discomfort. The man walking toward the main table was known by many only by name. Riccardo Moretti, a respected investor, an influential figure in the market, and a rare presence in face-to-face meetings. He didn't show up for just anything, only for decisive turning points, and the fact that he was there in that room made it clear that something much bigger was going on. What no one knew, yet, was the real reason he was there. The narrator, however, already understood that that moment would mark the beginning of Mauro's emotional collapse. Riccardo greeted a few people with a discreet nod. No big smiles, no rush. He approached the table, placed a folder on the polished wooden surface, and then looked directly at Livia. "Good morning, Livia. It's good to see you," he said. The room froze. Co-workers were left open-mouthed. Analysts stared. The murmuring began before anyone could control their reactions. They know each other. What's going on? Why did he greet her? Mauro tried to laugh it off as if it were an insignificant coincidence. "Oh, so the young lady knows Mr. Moretti?" he asked, pretending to be casual. But his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Riccardo answered before Livia could say a word. "I know her, yes. I know her very well." He turned toward the board. "In fact, I've been following her work for years." Shock rippled down the table. A board member leaned in, curious. "What do you mean, following her work?" Riccardo opened the folder slowly, building tension on purpose. "Before I explain, let me make something clear. I'm here at the request of the investor group. We're evaluating the possibility of increasing our stake in this company. To do that, we need to know who really makes a difference here inside." Mauro puffed his chest, proud. "Of course, we're fully available to provide any information you need." Riccardo raised an eyebrow. "Great. Then I'll start by highlighting something most people here are ignoring. The contribution of the intern you've all been underestimating." The room erupted in whispering. The director stiffened, swallowing hard. Riccardo went on. "The review she did, pointing out inconsistencies in the report, is extremely precise. No one should treat this as luck. Her analysis matches external information our team has already been monitoring." A board member's eyes widened. "So you're saying that what she brought up may be real?" "It's not just may," Riccardo replied. "It is real. And there's more." Now the room was split. Some employees looked at Livia with a mix of respect and confusion. Others started to realize that they had made a serious mistake by mocking her. The narrator could see on many faces the beginning of regret. Riccardo pulled another document from the folder and placed it on the table. "This report, which you don't have access to, is the result of an independent consulting job." He paused. "And a large part of that analysis was done by Livia's mother." The room exploded. "Her mother? What do you mean? This is getting weird." Mauro couldn't hold back anymore. "With all due respect, Mr. Moretti, but her mother, the intern and her mother, we're talking about high-level corporate decisions." Riccardo looked at the director the way you look at someone who's already lost. "And I ask you, at any point, did you actually look at the results before you judge them?" "Because we did." He took another breath. "And both Livia's analysis and Ms. Helena's work have already saved companies much bigger than this one." Mauro's eyes went dull. The humiliation was beginning to change direction. But Riccardo wasn't finished. "In fact," he raised his voice slightly, turning again toward the room, "if it weren't for the work of these two, one of our main investments would have gone under last year." Then he added firmly, "So before anyone here underestimates this young woman again, I suggest you first understand who she really is in this market." The mood flipped completely. Employees now looked at Livia with respect, shame, and surprise. Managers who had mocked her hours earlier were now avoiding her eyes. Board members exchanged glances, recalculating everything. And Mauro, he seemed smaller with every passing second. The narrator could clearly see the beginning of his emotional collapse, sweat at his temples, trembling hands, eyes scrambling to hide fear. Riccardo took a deep breath and said, "But even so, no one here is ready for the final reveal." And as he said that, the door opened again. And someone who shouldn't be there, someone who would change everything, stepped into the room. The door swung open slowly, as if the whole world were holding its breath. And then she walked in, a woman with a firm posture, intelligent gaze, simple clothes, but with a presence so strong that she silenced the entire room the second she appeared. Helena. The employees stared at her, puzzled. Mauro frowned. "Who is that?" he hissed, annoyed. "This meeting is not open to visitors." Ricardo, however, turned to her with genuine respect. "Welcome, Helena. We were just talking about you." The room exploded into whispers. "The intern's mother? What is she doing here? This makes no sense." Livia remained frozen. She hadn't been told anything. The narrator saw the mix of surprise and pride swelling inside her. Mauro, trying to regain control, spoke up. "Excuse me, but this meeting is restricted. Only board members, directors, and investor representatives are allowed in." Ricardo crossed his arms. "Perfect, then she's exactly where she belongs." Silence dropped like a weight. "Excuse me?" Mauro stammered. Ricardo opened the folder again and took out a second, thicker document, with multiple signatures on the cover. The sound of the paper hitting the table echoed like thunder. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the official technical report from Moretti and Associates. Consulting, responsible for restructuring at-risk companies over the past year." He pointed to the top of the first page. "And this is the name of the person who led that restructuring." All eyes followed his finger. They saw the name, and they couldn't believe it. Helena Ferreira, lead corporate recovery analyst. Signature, H. Ferreira. The same signature that the most respected business owners in the country knew. The signature that had saved failing companies. The signature that had influenced billions in decisions. The room went dead silent. "So you're—" a board member stammered. "You're that Helena Ferreira?" Helena smiled softly. "That's me. I just didn't think I'd have to bring my resume to prove my worth." Mauro went completely pale. "This is a joke." Ricardo stared him down, his voice now sharper. "No. The joke is how you treated her daughter, not knowing that for years you've been relying on this woman's reports. Reports that kept this company alive during crises you didn't even notice." A board member added, stunned. "So, that external analysis we reviewed last year—" "That was mine," Helena confirmed. "Mine and my team's, which included my daughter, yes." The room filled with nervous muttering. Some executives choked. One analyst dropped her phone. Another put his hand to his mouth, horrified. Mauro tried to react. "This proves nothing. It doesn't prove that this intern has any authority here." Ricardo sighed, as if he'd been expecting that argument. "Then take a look at this." He held up another document. "This is the report we used to decide that your company needed internal monitoring, and the person who first detected the projection inconsistencies was Livia herself." He placed the document on the table. On it, in plain letters, "Preliminary analysis carried out by Livia Ferreira, Strategic Technical Consulting." The reactions were immediate. "Oh my God! She was working with them before all this? How did no one notice this?" Ricardo continued firmly. "And one more thing. The decision to place Livia here as an intern came from the investor board. We needed to observe the internal culture. We needed to see how this company treats people who are at the bottom of the hierarchy. Unfortunately, we had enough confirmation in just 2 days." Livia felt the air leave her lungs for a moment. She had never imagined that her presence there was part of a strategy. Never imagined that her mother was involved. Never imagined that Mauro, arrogant and untouchable, would be exposed in front of everyone. Now trembling, Mauro tried to brace himself against the table. "This is a conspiracy to destroy me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You're trying to ruin my reputation." Helena looked at him with a calm simplicity, and that hurt much more than any scream could. "No one destroyed your reputation, Mauro. You did that yourself when you chose to humiliate people you thought were too small to fight back." The sentence hit the room like a verdict. Some board members nodded slowly. Analysts looked at Livia with teary eyes. Even the ones who had laughed at her the day before now seemed desperate to shrink into their seats. The narrator could see it clearly. The mask of power on the director's face was melting. Ricardo took one step forward and announced, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the final revelation, the one that will define this company's future." The room held its breath once again, because Helena and Livia aren't just responsible for critical analyses. One of them has a direct say in the future and control of this company. Eyes went wide. Mauro nearly fell backwards in his chair. "And that," Ricardo said, "is what we're about to reveal. It was time for the final blow, the definitive document, the truth no one had ever imagined. The narrator knew the next minute wouldn't just bring down a director, it would shake an entire system. The room was still reeling when the chairman of the board cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the meeting. "All right," he began, looking from Mauro to Helena and then to Livia. "I think it's clear that this is much bigger than a simple misunderstanding." Mauro tried to speak. "Excuse me, I demand the right to defend myself." But no one stepped in to support him. It was just him, his trembling voice, and the weight of choices he'd been making for years. Ricardo took a step back, giving space. It was time for someone else to speak. Time for someone who had been treated like nothing, to show who she truly was on the inside. The chairman turned to Livia. "Do you have anything to say before the board deliberates?" She drew a deep breath. The narrator saw her racing heart. The memory of her mother being humiliated years earlier, the long nights of study, the promise to never become like those who trampled others. Then, with a steady voice, she began, "I'm not looking for revenge." The sentence was simple, but it cut deep. "What happened here today is not just about me. It's about how this company sees the people at the bottom of its hierarchy." She looked straight at Mauro. "Yesterday, you called me incompetent in front of everyone, without even looking at my work. Today, we found out that the report you presented was inflated and hid real risks. That's not just a technical error. It's a serious lack of respect for the people who depend on this company." A heavy silence filled the room. "When a director manipulates numbers, he doesn't just deceive the board," she continued. "He deceives employees, families, people who count on their paycheck at the end of the month. This isn't about spreadsheets. It's about lives." Cornered, Mauro tried to justify himself. I just made more optimistic projections. The market is competitive. Everyone adjusts the numbers. I never wanted to hurt anyone." His eyes filled with tears. For the first time, his tone wasn't arrogant. It was desperate. Helena looked at him calmly. "The difference, Mauro, is that the people down there pay for your adjustments. When transparency is missing at the top, layoffs pile up at the bottom." A board member who had been neutral until then finally spoke. "I agree. The director's attitude doesn't match the values we say we stand for. If he behaves like this in front of investors, imagine how he treats people who can't defend themselves." Mauro started to beg, his mask of authority completely shattered. "Please, I've been here for years. I dedicated my life to this company. I can fix it. Give me another chance." But there was no respect left in his voice, just fear of losing his position and status. The chairman took a deep breath. "Doctor Mauro, in light of the evidence presented, your attempt to manipulate results, and your disrespectful behavior towards subordinates, especially your conduct yesterday and today, which has been recorded, this board has decided to remove you from your position effective immediately." The words fell like hammer blows. "You will be replaced while we conduct a full audit of your years in leadership," he concluded. Mauro collapsed into his chair. The man who had walked into that room acting like he owned the truth now looked smaller than any intern he'd ever humiliated. But justice didn't stop there. The chairman turned to Livia and Helena. "As for the two of you, what you did here today is far from ordinary. It's courage, ethics, and competence at a level very few people have." He looked directly at Livia. "Livia, this board would like to formally invite you into a special internal development program. You will no longer be treated as just an intern. We want you close to where decisions are made." For a second, she felt her legs go weak. Under the table, Helena squeezed her hand in silence. The narrator saw it. This wasn't vanity. It was the feeling of finally being seen beyond her badge. "And Ms. Helena," the chairman continued, "we'd like to propose an ongoing consulting contract with our group. What you've built outside this company deserves respect inside it as well." Some employees who had remained silent began to speak up shyly. "I'd like to apologize to Livia. I was disrespectful yesterday too." She listened, took another breath, and responded with the same calm her mother used to show at that old accounting counter. "It's all right. What matters is what we do from now on. But remember this, no one here is just anything." That sentence hung in the air like a new, unwritten rule. The meeting ended, with Mauro leaving, head down, under the gaze of people who no longer feared him. At the same time, eyes full of respect and curiosity turned to Livia and Helena. But the real consequences of that morning would take time to unfold, and many people who thought this was just a one-time scandal would soon realize it was actually the beginning of a deep transformation. 6 months after that historic meeting, the company's daily life was no longer the same. The hallways felt less tense, conversations less loaded with fear. Mauro's fall hadn't just replaced a director. It had triggered a wake-up call for everyone who believed a big title was a free pass to trample those beneath them. Meanwhile, Mauro's life had turned upside down. Far from the dark wooden table and the award-covered walls, he now worked at a small consulting firm, far from the spotlight. The office was in a basic commercial building with a noisy air conditioner and ordinary chairs. No private office, no assistant announcing his arrival. In the first few weeks, he experienced something he'd never imagined: being ignored. He introduced himself to potential clients, but many didn't even remember his name. Others did remember, and frowned when they connected his face with the quiet stories that had circulated about the audit at his old company. One rainy afternoon, Mauro walked into a small business to offer his services. The receptionist rushed, barely looked up at him. "You can wait over there, please. The owner will see if he can fit you in," she said, pointing to a hard chair in the corner. It was almost a replay of the scene he himself had played before when he told an intern to sit in the corner. The narrator saw it. The discomfort creeping up his chest wasn't just awkwardness, it was memory. While he waited, he overheard some employees talking about a consulting firm that had helped a partner company get back on its feet. "I heard it's run by a woman named Helena Ferreira," one of them said. "And her daughter, the spreadsheet girl, works with her," another replied. "Serious people, they don't fudge numbers." Mauro closed his eyes for a moment. The world was small, and it had a long memory. A year after everything happened, other pieces had shifted too. The analyst who had laughed at Livia in that first meeting didn't get the promotion she thought was guaranteed. Instead, she was moved to a less strategic area. There, she had to learn, in practice, to listen to trainees and interns who sometimes knew more than she wanted to admit. It hurt her ego, but little by little, she started to change. One of the managers who loved to say orders are orders ended up leaving the company. In Nye, his new job at a smaller organization, he was just one more employee. He had to adapt to a culture where his badge didn't shield him, and where any disrespectful comment brought instant feedback. For the first time, he felt the kind of pressure he used to impose on others without a second thought. Not everyone fell publicly. Some quietly chose to rethink their behavior, stop making jokes, cut cruel comments short, give space to voices they would have ignored before. Fear of exposure was the initial push. Contact with new leadership inspired by what happened with Livia did the rest. What happened in that conference room didn't stay as gossip on the office grapevine. It became an example in training sessions, internal talks, hallway conversations. "Remember the story of the intern and her mother?" became a warning phrase, a living reminder. Meanwhile, Livia used everything that had happened to build something even bigger. 1 year later, the company was no longer the same. And at the center of many changes was the girl who had once been told to sit in the corner, Livia. She was still simple, same badge, same posture, same calm way of speaking. But inside, the narrator could see, her place had shifted to another level. Now, instead of just watching meetings from the sidelines, she took part in internal committees, working groups, and special projects that reshaped the company's culture at its roots. One of the first initiatives she helped create was a program called Voice from the Ground. The idea was simple but powerful. Open a safe, documented channel where interns, assistants, cleaning staff, receptionists, and frontline workers could share ideas and complaints. Anyone could report disrespect, bullying, or unfair treatment, and each case would be reviewed by a mixed committee made up of people from different levels of the company. "If someone had really listened to me that first day, a lot of this could have been avoided," Livia said in one of the program's launch meetings. "Now I want to make sure no one here has to scream to be taken seriously." The impact was immediate. Joking comments started to disappear. Managers who used to humiliate people in public started thinking twice before exposing anyone, not just because they feared punishment, but because they were being trained to see the human being behind the badge. Now, I'm going to show you something even deeper: the partnership between the company and Helena's work. With the new contract signed, Helena created, alongside other professionals, a consulting branch focused on small neighborhood businesses and family-owned companies. The idea was simple: use part of the big company's resources to support small entrepreneurs who, just like her once, felt lost in a maze of numbers, bills, and bureaucracy. They launched free training programs in basic finance, management, and planning, Many of these events took place in the company's own auditorium, the same space that used to be reserved only for big clients. Now, that room welcomed corner shop owners, domestic cleaners opening their first business, seamstresses, nail technicians, and self-employed service providers. Livia took part actively, translating complicated terms into simple language. Cash flow isn't a monster. It's just knowing what comes in, what goes out, and what's left. And most of all, not letting anyone make you feel like you're too dumb to understand it. Little by little, the place once associated with arrogance and fear started to become known as a reference point for inclusion, respect, and education. Inside the company, other changes followed. Leadership programs began, including mandatory modules on empathy, communication, and fighting prejudice. Hiring processes were redesigned to consider more candidates from public schools and low-income neighborhoods. Performance feedback stopped being disguised humiliation and became a more structured, respectful conversation. One day, in a meeting with new managers, someone asked, "But why change so much? The old way always worked." The chairman replied, "It worked for people at the top, but it hurt a lot of people at the bottom, and we don't want to be that kind of company anymore." Outside the corporate walls, the story of the intern who was humiliated and the mother who turned the meeting upside down started to spread, first in casual conversations, then in talks, then in videos, not with names, salary amounts, or job titles, but with the core message: respect, ethics, courage. Helena and Livia started getting invitations to speak at universities, events, and entrepreneur meetups. Their message was always the same. It's not money or title that defines someone's worth. It's character. The narrator clearly saw what was happening. What began as a moment of humiliation on an 8th floor had grown into something much bigger. A warning, a mirror, an invitation to change. And this is where the story stops being only about Livia and Helena and becomes about all of us who, at some point, have been underestimated or have underestimated someone else without even noticing. When the dust settled, when the meeting became just a memory and the changes became routine, what remained wasn't just contracts, titles, and board decisions. What remained was the story of an intern and a mother who proved, in practice, something we tend to forget all the time. That appearance is not essence. That money is not character. That status is not the same as greatness. Livia and Helena's story exposed an entire system that got used to judging people from the surface. Their last name, their clothes, their neighborhood, their job position, their accent. A system that believes those at the top know more, are worth more, deserve more, and those at the bottom should accept humiliation as part of the package. But now I'm going to show you the central point of this story. The person who truly changed the course of that company was not the director in the expensive suit. It was the underestimated intern. It was the mother no one knew by name. While Mauro used his position to protect himself, they used their character to confront what was wrong. While he hid risk in spreadsheets, they brought the truth behind the numbers into the light. While he thought humiliating people was leadership, they showed that real leadership is protecting those who don't have a voice. And deep down, this story isn't just about one fallen director. It's about the choice every person makes when they're face to face with someone in a lower position. Do you step on them? Or do you pull them up? Do you laugh along with the humiliation? Or are you the voice that says, "This isn't right"? Because in the end, there is no unjust system without real people feeding that system every day. And there is no transformation without someone willing to break the cycle. There are 3 sentences from this story that you can carry with you, and that would easily become short clips people save to listen to again. No one here is just anything. When you humiliate someone because of their badge, you're showing the size of your own emptiness. Character doesn't show up on a paycheck, it shows up in the choices you make when no one is forcing you to be fair. And now I want to speak directly to you, the one who made it this far in this video. Have you ever been underestimated or seen someone judged just by their appearance, the way they dress, or the job they do? What would you do in Livia's place? And in Helena's? Would you have the courage to speak up? Or would you stay quiet so you don't cause trouble? Tell your story in the comments. Seriously, what you've lived through might help someone feel less alone today. And if this story made you think, gave you a knot in your throat, or reminded you of something you went through, hit the like button now. It's not just about numbers, it's how YouTube understands that this kind of message needs to reach more people. And do one more thing, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. That person who's being humiliated at work, who's thinking about giving up, or even someone who keeps stepping on others thinking they'll never have to answer for it. Because in the end, the big lesson is simple. The spotlight might shine on the people at the top, but it's in the darkness of small rooms, plain desks, late-night study sessions, and quiet choices that real power is built. And if there's one thing today's story made clear, it's this. The world always turns a little more than we expect. If you believe that respect should never depend on someone's job title, salary, or last name, you've already understood the morale of this story. See you in the next video.